So welcome back to. Is this the second episode?
Third.
Third. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first one was a poor quality.
The second one, since we're OG, like
Right.
full on,
Yeah.
like supporting Trump. The
Right.
first one was a little bit soft,
Yeah. Yeah.
exploring the territory.
Yeah. This is the second episode, a third episode overall, with me and Luca, and we are presenting basically the progressive case for Trump. While also, exploring the unknowns, trying our best to surface what we don't know, and hoping to present just a more nuanced way of engaging around this like very charged subject. Um, and we're going to do some like reaction style content where we watch something and then sit with it and share what it evokes in us. And the thing on the radio waves, is that a phrase? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
The airwaves.
airwaves, is like the Springfield Cats meme, and it's been extremely memeified by now, as the internet often does. And we're gonna watch a very funny memeified version of it to seed this conversation. And,
Yeah. Something I'm feeling drawn to saying before
uh,
is since our last video, I've had some conversations with friends that were inspired by the video. Yeah, really surprising conversations. I think the most important thing that happened from those is talking about it while remaining in connection, including with people who disagreed and people who I was surprised were agreeing. But especially with the people who disagreed, like talking about it and staying in connection and not, like I noticed the force of, like the highly charged antagonistic frame coming up, and then from there we like settle down into still being in connection and being like, okay, we disagree about this and we're talking about it, but we're still fundamentally in connection, which was just noticing that in my personal life. I was like, damn, this is in some ways the juiciest part of this whole thing. Is softening the like nervous system activation that happens from this if you're just dealing with it on your own or on the internet, and you're actually dealing with it with another human being. There's space for, like, feels like a pretty big healing actually of the rift in American society of just still being in connection even in disagreement. So.
Which
Just
is a good
wanted to-
segue into this book that
nice.
I've designed, Disagree Without Disengaging.
Fuck
And
yeah.
on the back is the fight logo, hashtag progressives for Trump. I'm selling these at cost on Teespring. And there is so much here too to unpack, because I remember seeing this tweet by a human who I'm pretty sure was identified as trans, and what they were saying is that disagreeing without disengaging is okay if you're not a threat to my life. It's like I'm willing to engage with you in disagreement if you're not a threat to my life. Like that's what they were saying, and they saw Trump and MAGA supporters as like a threat to their existence. And it's like, and I had just designed this, and it's interesting to, it's like I think they were using the example of like, when black people were enslaved in the U.S., and if you were like engage in conversation with me, and we can disagree on. If you are oriented towards enslaving black people, then you don't deserve engagement from them,
Right.
in that disagreement. Like that was the counterpoint they were making, and there is some. I would say there's some truth to that. It's like it's like on certain subjects. Like if I saw a child being raped on the street, like they disagreed with my perspective that children should not be raped, then I don't think I would disengage, but I would engage with force, So I see that perspective, which is often on the radical left wing is like, like no conversations, just attack, it's like that's kind of the perspective.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is the question of whether that is the case, In my personal opinion on trans rights, that's not the case because of the 2020 ruling I mentioned last time as well that expanded like protection for trans rights from the Supreme Court, and also no statements of like the intention of any laws that are gonna reduce trans or LGBTQ rights. So then the question is that frame the actual case, or is this the key strategy if you're in a position of power or wanting a position of power and wanting it in a way that's not necessarily aligned with the populace is to like hijack like fear and like, you know, get the like really deep emotional triggers going. So the question is this thing, which for sure is true in the slavery case, is that just being hijacked by, you know, a group of people who want to maintain power and are using that as a trigger to get people like so worked up in fear that there's not even space for relating to the other side. And I think there's different opinions people can have on that, but for me personally, that's what it looks like is the case. And it actually, that if you remove the tactics of activating that emotional like fear response of this person's like a threat to my life and a threat to everything, you know, if you remove that, and it kind of goes both ways, honestly. Both sides are in that mindset, which causes everyone to be so worked up in fear from the get-go, so there's only space for the attack mindset. When you drop below that, to me it feels like, it feels different from the slavery example, for example.
It's I mean, there's so much there, and we could I could try to pull up that tweet, but that would be a diversion, or we could just watch the Springfield Cats.
Let's watch the Springfield Cats.
What do I search for?
Freedom Tunes, and then just Springfield Cats. I'm sure it'll come up. That's we're gonna add some lightness here, and I'm sure it'll circle back to more serious topics in the course of things. But
it's good to have lightness in political conversations, I think.
What could a second Trump administration look like?
Okay,
The
internet's like, hell no, you're trying to be light? No.
Concentrates power solely
They're
in
still
the
talking about
hands of
Project
the
2020.
president.
I know.
Crazy.
Project 2025 agenda
is a threat to middle-class families. Cutting
the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Eat the cat, eat the cat. Eat the cat, eat the cat. Eat the cat, eat the cat. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
There have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused.
Eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat. Eat the cat. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. Eat the cat. 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 Eat the cat.
The Springfield, Ohio Police Department has debunked this very bizarre and very hateful.
The cat. Eat the cat. Eat the cat. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
We
rate this on CBS confirmed team. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. Eat the cat. 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 They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat. Eat the cat. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs.
No eating dog, you cat.
Eat the cat, 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 eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
Is it?
Joe Biden, he wore a Trump hat.
Become a member at freedomtunes.com for exclusive cartoons.
Alright, so pause right there. There was a whole thing where he apparently was at a I don't know what it was, something related to 9/11 in Philadelphia or around Pennsylvania, where one of the planes had fallen, and he was talking to a bunch of like retired firefighters. One of them was wearing a Trump hat, and he gave that guy his hat, and then that guy gave Joe Biden the Trump hat and like egged him, put him on, and then he like Joe Biden put it on for a bit and like joked around and took it off.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, that because I was wondering like what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts because I know you've had I think more thoughts probably than me on the Springfield
Yeah.
Cat situation. So.
Yeah, and that was like I was mentioning to you, like, I've been really wanting to engage people in the community, people who are differently oriented than us, politically speaking, in conversation, because, we are sharing space with them, and really all of this is an experiment in presenting a better way of relating around politics, more nuance, like being able to just hold triggers and not get at each other and just talk through things. And the only comment that I received on one of my YouTube videos, and I'm still grateful for that engagement, was from a person in the community who joked about how he had watched one of our videos, and he joked about how okay, but what about the Springfield Cats though, or something. And it was a joking remark, and I responded to it saying, I'm sure Kamala Harris has a tax subsidy in mind that would take care of that too. It's like snark meets snark, and I was also leaving the snark aside, I'm happy to chat if you want to come on the channel, and this is still an invite extended to CJ if you'd like to come. I'd love to have a discussion. There's so much in this Springfield Cats thing, which there is the layer where let's start off with the facts, or the objective facts as much as possible. Trump brought this up in the debate. Trump mentioned that he had seen videos or heard anecdotes from people in Springfield that Haitian migrants, which he calls illegal, I suppose, but if you talk to someone on the left, they say that these migrants have come through a special program instituted by the Biden-Harris administration, so it's not illegal because it's a program instituted. And the right side of the topic is that program itself is illegal. So there is that clash there itself. So he heard these anecdotes or saw some videos, and then he brought it up on the debate stage, this is what I hear. And he brought this up under a broader umbrella of illegal immigrants coming into the country and creating issues that legally residing people here have to deal with. And his stance is that shouldn't be the case. Legally residing people here should not have to deal with any challenges that people who have entered the country illegally are bringing forth. So that is that was a broader umbrella in which he mentioned this one thing.
Right.
And then the response to that from the moderator was that that they checked with the mayor or I don't know if it was the mayor of some other city administrator, and the city administrator said that there have been no credible reports of this happening. And that's kind of been where this is stuck, on one end, and then Harris's response to that was this is so ridiculous, I don't even know what to say. That was the energy with which she responded in the debate. Now, there is this one narrative of Trump is, ridiculous idiot, slash spreading lies that could put the lives of illegal immigrants or immigrants broadly at risk, because the Trumper who is a Trumper because they have subconscious racism is not going to check the legality of whoever they take it out on. So there is that angle. And then another angle that's been alive in my mind, and it lives like a alternate frame in my mind, is that firstly, when I hear a city bureaucrat saying something like there have been no credible reports of something, whatever that something is, there is a part of me that goes, okay, that gives me no information. It's that gives me no information about whether that something is happening or not. Because as a city bureaucrat, where I'm my career rests on my city being run well, I'm going to take efforts to make sure that my
interesting,
city is run well, and I'm going to make efforts to make sure that people think my city is being run well. So there's like a direct incentive there for me to kind of shove things under the carpet till it blows up. You know, like if there's like 3 reports coming in, I'm just going to be like, you know, let's just ignore this. Let me just... And that's where the language incredible comes into play, right? It's like, because then that is a judgment call that I make. Like, I'm like, I got this reporter, it's not a credible report. And the like example or like spiritual example that comes to my mind is this story of like in 1917, there was a phenomenon called the miracle of the sun, which was predicted by an apparition of the Virgin Mary, who appeared apparently to 3 shepherd kids and told them that on this date, at this location, if you look at the sky, the sun is going to zigzag around. And 17,000 people gathered in Fatima, Portugal, on that date. At first, they did not believe the kids, but then over time, like momentum built, and then they gathered in this village in Fatima, Portugal, and they report having seen some crazy shit in the skies. But if you look at the Wikipedia article of the miracle of the sun, there is an article on this, on the miracle of the sun, then underneath there is a section about scientific dismissal of this. Like it was... None of the reports matched each other or something. Like when scientists visited and investigated this phenomena, none of the reports conclusively matched each other, so they dismissed the phenomena as like a hallucination. But 17,000 people went and saw it, reporters on it. So there is this like general and you know, if you look at UFOs, like after the classified files were released earlier this year or earlier last year, like there is some real evidence there that had been, you know, if you spoke to a government official about the UFOs in the 1990s, they would be like, oh, there's no credible reports of this because they're partly doing their job in maintaining secrecy, or they do not have access to some information, you know, for a combination of reasons. So that's like one angle of it is like, yeah, like a city administrator, like trusting a city administrator to speak the truth, in my mind, is just ridiculous. It's just, you just don't understand how bureaucracy works. Holding that, it's like, you know, the frame that I see Trump through in this is that he cares. Like he cares about one-off reports that come through him. And he's like, everyone talks about him as like a ridiculous guy who would believe anything, but I actually don't know what his own level of belief in that is. Like, and this is you know, speaking as someone who has a level of belief that has a whole spectrum. Like there are certain things I believe with great certainty. There are certain things I believe with like 30% certainty, but I have a low threshold on what I speak about. Like I would speak openly about the things that I have a sense that this is true, but I could be wrong about it. Whereas I think many humans have a very high threshold on what they allow themselves to express. Like they only express the really certain things. And in some ways, when I hear him speak about this situation that he has heard reports about, he's like, I hear him speaking to something that could be wrong, but he's speaking about it because it concerns the people that he cares about. So I see some of his care for legal American residents particularly. And he simultaneously doesn't care about illegal, like I would say that's true, like he doesn't care about the risks that he opens up. for illegal immigrants, and he's probably blind to what I shared earlier about, someone, white nationalist, racist Trumper is not going to distinguish between who is legal and who is illegal. But there is some care, and I see him as like an old grandfather, just like he's susceptible to, like, he cares, but he does not he allows himself to say more things than, like, he's like less controlled about what he allows himself to express than someone who doesn't give a fuck. Like, if I'm in a part of the political establishment and I just don't care, I'm just doing my job, quote unquote.
Don't care about the people, you mean?
Yeah, and I get a scripted set of questions and a scripted set of responses, then of course I'm never going to say anything that is out of that, like, out of what has been prepared for me. But it also would make me less human in my mind, like, and that's how I feel about, like, Harris. Like, she just doesn't feel human to me. Like, I can't feel her. Like, she just, like, has these scripted responses. Like, you could write, I think they call it like an automata in computer science. Like, you could write an if blank then blank protocol that completely replaces Harris. At no point will there be anything that would surprise you. You could, like, completely program, if you hear this then say this, if you hear this then say this. Like, that's how I feel. And the unpredictability of Trump that feels so scary to, like, oh, he's unpredictable. It's because he is giving you what is alive in him, and we are too used to politicians who follow scripted protocols. It's just like they're robots, they're like reading off fucking teleprompters, like having scripted interviews.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pause there because it's like a lot to share.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that as well. Yeah, love all of that. Yeah, it feels like it's getting to something really deep, which is like the trust metric, I guess, of what causes one to trust a politician or a party. And to me, that's a lot of, like, I've had a lot of people tell me who are like, I somewhat agree with a lot of what Trump is saying, or like certain frames he's breaking, but I don't trust him to follow through. Yeah, and it's like, do you trust institutions or do you trust people? To me, feels like a large. It's kind of oversimplifying it, but that's a big part of it. Where Harris, like, for a lot of people, the fact that she follows a script, like, is a good thing and increases trust, because it's like, this is a predictable system, and the system as a whole and the institutions as a whole have a set of values that they're propagating, and no individual can come in and shift those values, and the individuals are just cogs of that larger institution. And you trust the institution and you trust the values that it's founded upon. And then Trump's coming in as a human. I think you're very accurately pointing out that he, like, one of the core things that both people love about him and people hate about him is that he's a human and just acts as like fully himself in a way. And a lot of that being himself is, like, not that great. So for a lot of people, that's like huge. Like, I think when you're talking about, like, he's a threat to my life, and a lot of that is like, he's this unpredictable human being that's not following institutional values. He's just following his own values. And I remember when we watched the debate with some friends, I remember someone said, which was just really stuck with me, he was like, with Harris, I can feel like so much above her, like all these institutions and all these, like, individuals and institutions and donors and everything. It is above. And with Trump, I don't feel anything above him. And he was like, and I don't know how to feel about that. Like, but it was interesting to point that out, and that does feel like a strong felt sense, I think. And what you're saying with Harris, you can't feel her. I feel like a lot of that goes to that. And yeah, then the question is, like, do you trust institutions and the values those institutions are founded upon? For me, the answer is no. I mean, I don't mean all the institutions of America. I mean specifically the institutions underlying Kamala Harris and her candidacy and what her presidency would be founded upon, which does involve a lot of institutions in the governance of America, but not all of them. So that's the first question. Then 2 is, do you trust Trump as a specific human being? So not his institution, because he's not a Republican. Republicans are him, if that makes sense. Like him as a human, he as a human is at the top, and his values are dictating. Not completely, you know, like it's not like black and white, because you know it takes a lot to become a candidate. So he's definitely doing some things that are Republican, and he's propagating those values. But a lot of it, and even if you compare like Republican Party 10 years ago to now, it's changed massively in terms of its values, because a lot of it is like Trump's values, and this is his platform for propagating that as a human. So the question is, do you trust Trump's values, and do you trust his sincerity in you know, fulfilling those values, which is more than we can go into in this video, but I think that's the key question to ask. And then there's a lot of interesting things about, first of all, then you have to like actually look at Trump as a person, like just as a person, not as a politician. Like, do you trust him as a person? Not do you like him as a person?
Do you even see him as a person?
Well, that's the first.
Do you see him as a human being, or do you see him as the personification of all that is evil and heinous and horrible in the world?
Yeah, and this is a huge thing. I had a chat with a friend who was like saying that she was basically saying like Trump and Harris are both products of the system and are just mere perpetuations of the system under different superficial guises, but they're fundamentally the same in both being, like I was saying earlier, like institutional, propagating institutional values. And to me, that's not the case. That is the case historically. The political parties are just kind of mirrors of each other, and you see that now with like all the neocons that are endorsing Kamala Harris, like Dick Cheney and George Bush and stuff. Like
George Bush is endorsing Kamala Harris.
I believe so. Someone told me that, so I only have verbal confirmation, so I don't want to. But Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney I saw that from a credible source. And also, like, you know, the Biden administration has neocons running their foreign policy, at least their Russia foreign policy. So there's the uniparty nature of that is definitely generally true. To me, Trump feels like not part of that, because he like broke the system in his own personal life. Like he like maxed out in a way and like made it and like got to where he was by like manipulating a lot of the laws of, you know, like, and this is like in that 2016 debate where, you know, he was being accused of using tax loopholes, and then he was like, yeah, I did use tax loopholes because I'm smart, and every smart person that's rich uses tax loopholes. I wouldn't be rich if I hadn't used them. So there's, and also in terms of his like his media presence of like you know, there's becoming a media personality. A lot of that is about learning like psychology and like kind of manipulating. You're not operating within the constraints of the system as it presents itself. You're stepping out of that, and you're, at least in the case of how he did it, you're kind of moving out of the system, and once you're out of it, you can start using it for your own means. Which all sounds terrible, obviously, like, oh, he's like fucking up the system and all. But what that does give him is this, like, he's broken out of that institutional system and he's become his own person through that. In an admittedly kind of gnarly way, but it still makes him like independent in his values. So that's the first thing, is to me he's not institutionally, he's not a cog for institutions. He's his own person, and he's, I think for at least 100 years, if not ever, like the first politician, maybe since like the founding fathers, that is that. He's the first politician ever, the first president ever that was not either a governor or a general.
Oh, he's gonna be so happy to hear that.
Trump.
Yeah, I mean Trump, if he hears it, like he's really,
right. He's the first.
Like he's like since the founding fathers. Because he had that comment, no, in that NABJ interview where he was like, the best thing that happened to black people is Abraham Lincoln.
And I have a little thing I want to say about the exaggeration aspect in a sec as well, because I feel like the Springfield Cats is really related to that as well. But yeah, just to finish that thread. So that gives him this, like, he's an independent human being, and he's kind of broken out of the system and like sees through all its facades and kind of knows how to harness it. And that's a large part of how he became president, is just, you know, like manipulating the system for his own ends, and he's good at that, for better or worse, you know. And then it's a neutral thing that he was not a politician, not a governor or a general. I'm not saying that's an intrinsically good thing. But in this specific context, that is a good thing, in the sense that it means he's never been a pawn for the system. And it's a very big difference between being a government official or politician and being an independent businessman.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of people think those are very similar roles.
Yeah,
like
they're
you're
not.
part of the system.
Yeah.
They can be, like if you
Yeah.
make your money like through being like a a hedge fund person or
Operator
something,
or
or an
something.
operator,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But as an entrepreneur, which is what Trump
It's like the
ultimately
difference
is.
between a founding CEO and like an operating CEO. Like oftentimes startups will
Yeah.
later on bring in someone with lots of management expertise who know how to do specific things for a company, like take it from this stage to this stage,
Right.
then fire them and then bring someone who can take it from Series G funding to public. But
Right.
it's different in being like a founding CEO.
Exactly, and the energy of it is different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not in the system in the same way, and you're not a cog for the system. Like you're the person that's
Mm-hmm.
driving the thing you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also why like a lot of tech founders like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk tend to be the ones who have these like really radical like self-generated opinions.
Right.
And not to endorse those opinions, but just to say that at least they do have them in this, and you can feel when you watch, especially Musk in interviews, you can just feel he's like an independent person and like
Right.
does not give a fuck
Yeah.
about like
How he's,
the
like-
institutional cog nature through which other people, and so many interviewers ask him like, but what about like, you can feel their fear almost like, but if you say these things, like people are gonna stop buying your car and like,
Right.
and advertisers, and he's like, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
So and Trump, I think people don't necessarily realize he's also an entrepreneur because there's this narrative of like he just inherited his father's
Right.
business, and he did inherit his father's business, but it was fairly small, and he innovated the brand, like Trump the brand, which gets latched onto other companies that he doesn't have to run, but he built the brand out, and Truth Social, he built that in 2 years. It's like a massive company now. And his like
Even The Apprentice, the show.
Exactly, The
it's a
Apprentice.
unique thing to pull off.
Yeah, exactly. So he's got. So I think that's an important distinction. Gosh, there's so many threads here.
Yeah.
And then I just want to say in relation to the Springfield Cats thing about this exaggeration thing, because that's he always exaggerates like ridiculously. Like the Abraham Lincoln comment is like ridiculous, obviously, and like I mean not obviously, but it's.
Do you think he believes that? Like, do you think he's believing?
No, that's what the thing is. I think he, like the media ecosystem he's operating in is not neutral. Like he knows, and everyone knows at this point, basically, that like the media ecosystem is super hostile to Trump and is not like honestly reporting on like from a neutral standpoint about the situation, about what he's saying and what he believes. And so he has to like throw in these like crazy exaggerations to even like break through the noise. So I think that's how I think he does just exaggerate as a person to some extent, but I think he's also like, because then he says something ridiculous like the Springfield Cats thing, and then suddenly everyone is talking about it, and then it creates the opening, and this is what happened for me, it creates the opening to be like, something feels a little bit off in how everyone is talking about this, let me like look into it myself.
Let's see.
And then, which wouldn't happen, like imagine if he was just like being like, I don't know, his videos on his website are really interesting, like his policy videos. Like when you watch them, you're like, if he wasn't exaggerating all the time, like no one would watch these. He'd be like an irrelevant person, because it's like, oh, it's just a person talking fairly calmly about policy things and like kind of like RFK style, which is like a lot of great policy ideas, but he didn't manage to like break through the noise because he doesn't exaggerate.
Yeah. And I wanted to share a little bit on the ridiculousness of the Springfield Cats thing. I wanted to share one point, which is that I get this sense that Americans in general are very blind to what goes on in the rest of the world. Like they just don't know. They're like cultural lens is very America centric. And then on top of that, liberal Americans live under the delusion that they know how other places operate. So it's like regular Americans, like conservative Americans are ignorant, but they're not trying to hide the ignorance. Liberal Americans are equally, maybe not equally as ignorant, but it's like many liberal Americans are very ignorant, but then they have their delusion that they are not ignorant. So when I, as an Indian American person, an immigrant to this country, heard the Springfield Cats thing done by Haitian migrants, I was like, they eat cats in parts of the world that's a part of their culture. Like, it may seem ridiculous to a cat lady in the US who has 7 cats and that's all she has in her life.
Right.
But that's a reality in parts of the world. And
Right.
where I oriented to was, is this true for Haiti? Like, let me go look it up instead of being like, oh, fucking ridiculous. Like,
Right.
and that like dismissal of it as like a ridiculous idea to me reveals the bias, like this aspect of this projection that liberal Americans often try to bring forth, which is, I am well traveled, I know about the world, and I care about the world. But they're like just actually very ignorant in many ways, but they want to believe that they're not. And it's not to say that they aren't well traveled or they haven't learned about the world, but it's like just baseline America, I think, learns so little about the world as compared to how much people in other countries in the world learn about the world. Like,
Right.
Indian education has a broader like coverage of what happens in the world than American education with regards to India, for example. So there is, it felt important to call that out. It's like, do you even know do you know what happens in Haiti when you are dismissing it?
Right.
Maybe it's a thing, and then, and I don't know. I don't know if it is a thing, not a thing. Like, that needs to be investigated. But whenever there is this like immediate like, oh, that's ridiculous, let's dismiss that. To me it like reveals that phenomena of the self-delusion of wanting to know what goes on in the world, and combined with a very Americocentric lens through which like Americans look at everything.
Yeah. Well, I saw some videos and read some stuff that it is a thing in Haiti actually.
Is it?
To have like rituals around like killing animals, and I think I read one post of someone who'd worked in Haiti for a few years with like refugee camps and stuff, and he said like at night often there'd be like squeals of all these animals getting slaughtered in rituals and stuff. And the interesting thing there is that there's this, even saying this now, I mean, there's this feeling of like, if you say anything bad about illegal immigrants, you're like a racist.
Right, especially black people, right?
Right, exactly.
It's like, and again, there is the thing of like, underneath that fear, there is the judgment that this is bad. Like,
I was about to say
even
that,
like the ritual of sacrificing animals for whatever reason that they're doing it is a bad thing. It is an uncivilized thing. So then if you open yourself up to the possibility that there might be some people in Haiti who do that, you are a racist because you say they do bad things. But it's like,
right.
I'm not even looking at it like, there is parts of me which go like, oh, horrendous. But if it is a ritual, I'm open. Like, I'm curious, like, what is this ritual? Like, does this really happen?
Yeah.
But someone who is so like contracted in their vision of what is good and what is bad by this like Western civilized way of doing things is gonna hear me consider the possibility that these rituals happen in Haiti or any other country that is not a part of the West, and look at me as a racist. Like, how dare you think that they would do such a thing? I'm like, how dare you think that they wouldn't do such a thing? Why? How dare you think that they would only do the things that you think are possible for humans to do? Like, what the fuck? It's like,
that goes to something about kind of immigration in general, which I feel like is really essential about this whole thing, which is exactly what you're saying, is like people in other countries, in a lot of other countries, have like fundamentally different ways of being and different cultures. And this is if you look at Europe, you can see this much more explicitly, where there's a lot of huge issues, especially France has a lot of issues. And there's a lot of anti-Islam candidates who are like the biggest parties now. Like in Holland, the biggest party is like supremely anti-Islam. In France, Marine Le Pen, like one of the biggest parties, possibly the next president, super anti-Islam. And the reason is because there was this first like this kind of glorious utopia vibe of like, let's bring in all these other cultures and it's going to be great. But then it turned out that they had a lot of values that were antagonistic to Western values, like not valuing women, like rape things happening, and, you know, various kind of things that were not vibing very well with the culture they were in. And they also weren't integrating. Like, there was an expectation they're going to come, they're going to love everything about our values so much, they're just going to like drop their original culture and like adopt this one. That didn't happen. And just saying that is like, I feel like a self-projection onto myself of like, oh, that makes me like a racist, horrible person. But it's like, no, it's just different cultures, and I'm not intrinsically saying their way of being is bad. It's just different. I don't understand it. And if it comes into this country, it like shifts the dynamics. And there's ways to do that are like through legal immigration. Like, you can have it be softer, and like, you know, it's part of the US is having like pockets of different ethnic minorities living fairly closely linked to their home culture, but in a way that respects the broader culture they're in. There's a lot of that, and that's awesome. But yeah, something about the legal immigration thing with like the flow doesn't have like enough space or something to like be integrated well. And I think that's the thing that Trump was getting at with that comment, is like, we're just at the beginning basically of this flow of illegal immigrants affecting American society. Like, it's barely even started because it's fairly recent. And these are just like the first signs that like things might kind of escalate in pretty major ways. So I think that's where he's coming from, is like, just, yeah, these are just the minor first signs.
Right.
And then also related to that is like the terrorism side, which for me feels like the larger concern with illegal immigration, which is, you know, there's a lot of countries that really hate America and have actively done terrible things to America in the past at great cost to themselves. You know, like 9/11 is the biggest example. You know, in Iran, in their parliament, they scream like "Death to America" pretty often. There are like videos of that. And in Yemen, like a few months ago, there were like hundreds of thousands of people gathering in the Share just screaming like "Death to America." So there's a lot of people who hate America, and largely because America did bad things to them. So that's not the point. But yeah, there's a lot of people.
But this happens in Pakistan too. Like, America has consistently militarily funded Pakistan through India's like battle. Like, I don't think this necessarily happens with countries that have only suffered from America. I think there's also this factor of like, everyone hates the top kid. You know, it's like, if there's one dude in your class who gets all the girls, who gets all the grades, you know, you get jealous of him at some point. You know, it's like there is also that angle of people, and then the rulers of these countries find it easier to just foster that anger towards an external enemy instead of addressing the problems within. So as long as they can keep directing the anger towards, like, it channels the anger outwards instead of getting it channeled like towards the Shah, like whoever the I forget who's the supreme ruler of Iran. Ayatollah, yeah. And like the Ayatollah finds an avenue to channel the anger towards the Jews and Israel and the US, instead of having it channeled against him and having to face another revolution.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so if the border is open in the sense that anyone can come in, I mean, not like just randomly walk across the border, like it's not that easy, but it's easy enough that it's fairly straightforward for a terrorist to, and there have been a decent number, you know, not more than a few hundred, but there have been like known terrorists, or like people who are on the terrorist watch list, like found among, you know, illegal immigrants. But you don't even need the fact, it's just straightforward logic. Like a lot of countries that like massively hate America, a lot of people that massively hate America and have like, are willing to sacrifice their lives to destroy it. Right, especially the ones whose like entire countries have been like messed up by American foreign policy. A border which people can just kind of walk across, like boom. Of course there's going to be terrorists like attempting to cross the border, and some of them succeeding, and then creating like domestic terrorist networks. So it feels really icky to talk about because it is icky.
Yeah, it sucks. I can feel the contraction in your system.
Right, I mean, yeah, I'm feeling it. Yeah, because it's like, it's this like point of like, oh, if you're talking about like risk of terrorists, you know, you're like racist and all that. And even separately from that, it just sucks to talk about like the risk of terrorism and World War III, and these are just like shitty things to talk about. But they're like real, they're real issues.
To add some, you know, Yeah, I would say that it is complicated to talk about it because you're weighing on one hand the risk of terrorism, and on the other hand, which is, I think where many people on the left are oriented towards this issue from, which is a place of like wanting to support people having challenging situations in their home countries. Like, so it's a tricky balance to explore, and also holding the fact that it is true that, in order to have some level of like assimilation into a country which has certain values of outsiders, there needs to be a process of sorts. And the analog that comes to my mind, I also wanted to keep an eye on the time. It's like so maybe come to a close soon. Yeah. The analog metaphor I had in my mind was analogy. Sorry, is that if you're starting a communal house together, you and me, you're gonna first check what values we align on, and then when we like interview new people, we're gonna check if there is value alignment. And there is so many examples. This metaphor probably reaches those of you who are tuning in from broader Asheville spiritual conscious communities. Like, there's so many examples of communal houses just having disastrous effects, disastrous results, like the house itself like breaking apart, and just too many arguments, just like violence of an emotional kind, because there wasn't value alignment that was investigated and evaluated before like starting the house itself.
Yeah, and having said that, I think there is, in the context of a larger country, there is space for like radically different pockets. Like the Chinatowns in a lot of cities are a great example, where it's like totally different culture from like the culture around, but it works really well, and it's like well integrated while also not being integrated. So that's great, and there's the key thing is the like random people crossing the border part for me. Like, even with refugees, like there's ways to do that in a way where you're still like controlling for terrorists coming in, and the refugee camps are like set up in a way that it's like, you're acknowledging the fact that it's a very different culture, and the people are not going to just immediately be able to integrate into society like in Springfield, Ohio, where they're like in the town and integrated with the town. So it's not a black and white, like either no one can enter the country and we're not helping anyone in the world, or we're in the current situation of having like millions of people just crossing the border without being checked, and without like systems in place to like help integrate them. And so there's a lot of in between, and I think that's the key, is that the current extreme that we're in, to me, feels very dangerous on multiple levels. And the alternative is not like, let's just end all immigration. Like there's so many spots in between, and that's where I would want to land.
And I want to close with this thought, which I don't know if this is being talked about much, but I've experienced this in India, where the liberal-leaning faction in Indian politics did have like more of an open borders policy, because this also feels like a controversial statement to make, but I think this is fairly established now, because this happened like 10-15 years ago, because they knew that the new minorities who were coming in, who were poor and who were not as educated, perhaps did not know what democratic values were, could be like easily bought off for votes. And that was like a huge thing, and it was like a well-known thing that's what they were doing. And I really wonder, like we'll have to like really dig into this, but I really wonder what the along with the whole voter ID question, which I need to explore better too, but I wonder how the Democratic Party sees this from this possible angle of like, these are easy votes, if we like just bring in more people and now we are the saviors for them, so they're going to vote for us. And
well, it's worse than that, actually. Or finish your thought.
No, go for it.
Yeah, it's worse than that. So illegal immigrants are included in the census, in census numbers, and they're all going to Democrat states. which will increase the census numbers, which increases electoral college votes that those states get.
Oh, interesting.
Because the census over time determines.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, so there's actually, people who have looked into this. I don't know the exact numbers, but it would actually significantly shift, and is already significantly shifting the landscape.
Right.
It's like weighing, because it's close, Democrat, Republican, they keep alternating.
Yeah.
But with illegal immigrants being in liberal states, so they don't even have to be voting, because legal immigrants can't vote. So it's not even about the vote, it's purely about the census numbers. Basically, like, generates quite a few free new electoral votes.
I see, interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, which obviously no one would say that aloud. Although interestingly, there's I think maybe only one video or maybe multiple of maybe a Freudian slip of a Democrat, I believe senator, who said that explicitly.
Really?
Yeah,
We need to dig
in
that
New
up.
York.
I think it'd be interesting to include that in this video itself.
Sure, yeah, if we can find it. Yeah. But obviously that's not a kind of thing you would want to openly, because I was thinking like why I was not understanding. Like, again, refugees, I understand, like, bringing in refugees, but just letting people cross the border, like, randomly with, like, the cartels running that and stuff. Like, it doesn't, and it's so easy to stop, like, with, it's not like a technological, the wall and, like, more border security, like, it's a fairly straightforward issue to solve. So it's like, why is it, I was, like, so confused, like, why is it not being solved? Yeah. And the only answer to me that kind of makes sense, incentive-wise, is this, like, census numbers argument. There might be others, but... From where I'm coming from, to me that seems like
this was quite evident to me right from the beginning. I didn't know the specifics around the electoral college, but it was quite evident to me that this was a vote bank play, at least in my sense, just given what I've seen in India. Like, it's the same thing, and it's a very like left thing to do somehow, because the left has this tendency to give money to get votes.
Right.
If you look at Harris's policies, it's again I'm going to give you money for this, I'm going to give you money for that, and it's like, it's very in a sense it is very populist. Like, they keep calling Trump populist, and it's actually, in my view, like Harris's platform, Harris's way of speaking is very populist, because it's like, I'm going to do this one-time thing for you, so don't look at the state of the system, don't worry about it.
Right. Yeah.
Like in India, people,
also the school debt relief, I feel like was an attempt at that as well.
Right. Yeah. It's like people buying off, like in India, I know politicians buy off like votes with bags of rice. It's like there's places where that happens, and it's like, vote for us, you'll get a TV. Like, literally, there's places where that happens.
Yeah.
And it's like a higher class version of that. Is like, vote for me and you get to keep $6,000 when you have a first child. What about the third child that I have? Like, does it really solve something on the holistic systemic front?
Right. And I would say Trump does that too, to a lesser extent, I think, as far as I know of his policies. But I think it's also important to say, like,
what's
Trump,
an example where Trump does
that? Like, it's a little maybe less explicit, but like with homeschooling, like he's like giving a tax credit to people who are homeschooling. The no taxes on tips and stuff like that. Those feel like slightly more systemic, but I guess it's just important not to say like, oh, Trump is this like angel,
sure.
Who's not using any of the dirty political tactics. Like, that's not really
but that
the
again
point.
Lives in me as like some core, like I see some core values there, or core principles there.
Yeah.
Like, I really think the education system in the US is horrible. Like, it's just in a bad state, and then incentivizing homeschooling allows for newer education systems to emerge from the grassroots. And then, like, I did not even know that there were tax on tips. That just sounds ridiculous to me. Like, it's like I'm tipping someone for some good work they've done. It's not there. It's like further, like, taxing tips further like cements it as a wage, and it just feels icky. I don't know. So it's like,
I agree with you. I think the main point I was trying to make is kind of skewing away from like a failure mode, I guess, of this kind of debate, which is like interpreting us as saying like, Harris is doing shitty things, therefore you should vote Trump. And then people are like, but what about all the shitty things Trump is doing? And it's like, the point is not that Trump is not doing some shitty things, but the kind of intensity of them is different, and also much more fundamentally than that is like the values and like what we were talking about earlier with the human versus the institution. There's like deeper, bigger things, and we're not trying to say like Trump is like totally clean and not doing horrible things, but the focus is on these deeper, bigger things. So I was more just preempting that failure mode.
Interesting.
But maybe it doesn't even apply in this case.
Yeah, there is something there though. Like I think as we discuss this more, kind of being able to dig into what those values that we see are, because I see Trump as lying, exaggerating, and I see Trump being consistent with certain values.
Yeah, for sure.
I see Harris lying, and I see Harris being consistent with some values, and I just don't agree with those values. Like I think those values are disastrous.
Yeah.
So being able to verbalize that more, I think would be a real gift.
I think so too, yeah. It's kind of shocking how consistent he's been on the values front over time, and even on the policy front. Yeah.
Lovely.
Cool.
This is a stopping time for us. Yeah. All right, thank you so much for tuning in today. There'll be more on this, and hopefully we'll release this on some listening platforms soon, so you can also tune in while you're driving. So many of us do in North America.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.